Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to start a series of videos where I'll try to explain a little bit about some important points and issues and misconceptions and affairs that are happening in and around Syria. These videos hopefully will address these points in a way where I can give my point of view and a bit of an analysis about maybe some information that could be enlighten the viewers and bring some ideas from on the ground according to the events and affairs that have occurred, and maybe give a different perspective to the viewers about what's actually happening here, and give them, maybe you could say, a different understanding, or a more you could say a variety of opinions regarding these affairs. Look, the first topic I was planning and hoping on addressing today was 10 responsibilities of an Islamic government. Now, as you can see, as you know, in Idlib, there is a government established, the Syrian Salvation Government. Now, this government has, it claims to be an Islamic government, which abides or has its source of legislation is Islam. So along with this claim come responsibilities. Also with you could say the time and how things have developed and established throughout the revolution here, you could see how important the role of a government is to address the affairs of the Syrian people and fill the void of governance which was left behind after the Assad regime fell in these areas, as well as after millions of Syrians were displaced and moved up towards the north. So this government has a big responsibility on its shoulders, and I'm here to explain today my opinion about 10 of those responsibilities. Maybe we can start, inshallah. The first and foremost, number one, as a responsibility, is to uphold Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word and law, and for Islam to be the source of legislation and law. Now, the Islam as a legislation, to try to explain this a little bit more deeper, people also get the word Sharia, law. Sometimes you get mixed ways that people interpret this word or this title. So Sharia law, Sharia actually means law, and Tashriya is legislation. So it's just, the word Sharia means law. And this law is derived from 4 main sources, as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah explain, the scholars explain. I'm not a scholar, so I'll just give you what I've learnt regarding this, that there's 4 sources. The main source, number 1, is the Quran. The second source is the Sunnah. Third source is the al-ijma', which is the consensus of the ulama, and the fourth is al-qiyas. Qiyas is comparison, like comparing a situation with something that happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or is mentioned in the Quran or the Sunnah, that may not be occurred today. It's not by word or literally mentioned in the Quran or Sunnah or in the ijma'. So the qiyas takes place for these particular situations, so they can create a law and legislate something suitable to address this affair. These are the 4 sources: Quran, Sunnah, al-ijma', which is consensus, and al-qiyas. So keeping that in mind, so this is the first responsibility of the Islamic government, to make sure and preserve the sovereignty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's law, being the one and only source of legislation and law. Number 2 is a justice system fair justice systems which abides by this law. Now, all these points that I'm going to mention all abide by number one, which is upholding the sovereignty of Allah's law. So a justice system which is fair and abides by Allah's law. Now, this justice system, one very important thing, and on the ground where you have some sort of chaos and transformation from chaos to order, and people are still lived many years of having no real authority or government completely in control, solving and addressing the people's affairs. So when this government started expanding and strengthening itself and offering services, etc., you find issues that pop up. Now, one important thing is that this government, the justice system, is fair. Yani, it punishes the strong and the weak. It punishes the rich and the poor, not just the poor and the rich or the strong. Because they're strong, they don't get punished. This would be a big sign of corruption. So this justice system must uphold Islamic law and be able and fulfill punishing the strong and the poor, the strong and the weak, the rich and the poor. Allah knows best. Number 3 is provide an environment which encourages people to worship Allah, abide by His commands, and also encourages people to refrain from disobeying Allah and His commands. So they create this government, Islamic government, to create an environment which will call people to pray, call people to pay zakah, call people to do sadaqah, to dress appropriately, to not speak ill language, to not steal. This government needs to create an environment which calls people to defend their lands and strive and struggle and fight fi sabilillah, to defend the Muslimin from the enemies and to retake the lands. Also, dawah. They call people to good and prevent people from evil. This is definitely a responsibility that if the government doesn't do this, then there'll be a big void which will not be filled. So the government, Islamic government, must this responsibility is a must, needs to be implemented by the Islamic government. Number 4 is defend the lands from external infiltration, meaning defending its borders. The Muslim Dar al-Islam, the land of the Muslims, borders, so there's no infiltration from the outside. As you can see, there's military posts that need to be established, as well as patrols, security services, border crossings, in a way that the infiltration from outside, whether it be military or security or criminals, etc., they do not infiltrate into the lands of where the Muslims live. And number 5 is directly and indirectly linked, is protecting the internal, the land from inside, from internal enemies. Sleeper cells, Assad, ISIS, Russian, Iranian, etc. From thieves, robbery, criminals, murderers, as well as from spies, etc. So they've got to protect the internal, internally, for the Dar al-Islam, or the land of the Muslimin, so that Muslimin can live their lives peacefully and not fear anyone but Allah. This is a huge responsibility which definitely would take a lot of effort and energy, time and money to establish and develop. 4 and 5, defending from the outside, the borders from infiltration, and protecting the people on the inside from internal enemies and sleeper cells and criminals. Number 6, establishing an army which is capable of defending its areas from enemies, as well as capable of retaking lands which were occupied. And I mean in particular an Islamic government like in Syria, where there's many areas that have been occupied by the Russians, the Iranians, the Assad regime, Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia. So this government's got a huge responsibility on its shoulders to retake these lands from these enemies. And this will only happen if the military body, the army, is developed and strengthened in a way that it's capable of retaking these areas, and for them to rely on themselves, not rely on any other external forces to do that for them, because this is their responsibility at the end of the day. It's not, for example, Turkey's responsibility or other countries to retake the lands, and I don't think they will. The Syrian people, with their own hands, with their own efforts, with their own sons, they will be the ones that will liberate Syria from the enemies, from the occupiers, from the Assad regime. So this is a huge responsibility. And with no military, no matter how strong you are, politically, economically, diplomatically, you could say, if you do not have a strong military body to deter your enemies, then all those other wings, all those other ministries, you could say, are just about worthless. So the military body, or the army, to strengthen and develop it so it can retake all of Syria and defend the revolution, defend the Muslimin, this is a priority and a responsibility in the neck of the Islamic government. Number 7. Provide vital services for its citizens and residents. What I mean here is it's like developing and establishing infrastructure, institutions, roads, organization, management, so that this infrastructure can be the basis for a future for the citizens and residents, and for the government itself, and for the people. Without this infrastructure and organization and management and institutions, then you will not be prepared and ready to establish and develop for yourself a future. So it's the government's responsibility to organize this and to develop a hierarchy, develop ministries, institutions, to build infrastructure. And that definitely has obstacles, but we're not here to describe and discuss the obstacles. We're here to describe and discuss the responsibilities. So that needs to be, at whatever cost. If the government doesn't do this, then who will? Humanitarian aid organizations? Who's going to do that? So that's a burden on the shoulders and responsibility on the shoulders of the government, not on anyone else. Number 8 is provide the reasonable ability, or a reasonable atmosphere, you could say, or reasonably provide the ability for its citizens and residents to achieve or attain the basic necessities in life. For example, education, reading, writing, arithmetic, the bare minimum for all its citizens to be able to read, write, and have the mathematical ability to calculate. And then provide education, level 2, level 3, level 4, higher education, master's degrees, university degrees, etc. Education, drinking water, fresh, clean drinking water, fuels to operate these their affairs, bread at a reasonable price. It's affordable. Fruit and vegetables, meats, etc. So they've got to build the relationships. I'm going to come and speak about that. Is they've got to do what they can, what they must do as a responsible and as a government, is to prepare and organize itself in a way that education is provided, fresh drinking water is provided for all its citizens, fuels, roofs over their heads, bread, the basic necessities in life. Now that obviously, as governments develop, you can see in many countries around the world with regards to services, many governments are providing far more than that, and that definitely needs to be achieved. But I'm talking the responsibility, the bare minimum that this government needs to provide for its citizens and residents. Allah knows best. That's number 8. Number 9 is provide a prosperous, fair, just, unbiased economic environment that fights corruption and gives a fair go to the poor and to the rich, a fair go to the layman, worker, and to the businessman, and not things, and to provide an atmosphere where people want to invest, where people want to work, where people want to develop, where people have encouraged to establish and build. This environment is priceless, because this will be a basis for the people to move forward and prosper and be able to establish for themselves and their children a future. So this environment is a responsibility in the government to fight corruption and to give a fair go, provide employment opportunities to those who reside in its areas, so that it can fight poverty and fight crime, etc. through this, and also provide an opportunity for those who want to make money and develop for themselves and build for their families and their children, etc. 10, last but not least, is represent. So this is number 10. Represent the Islamic project, the Islamic government, its citizens, its residents, represented in the best of ways in front of the world. Build for it alliances, allies with neighboring countries or countries around the world, to build for its people a good reputation, to provide, you could say, or to deliver the people's messages to the outside world and receive from the outside world messages towards its people, to be that link between the country or its the state or the government and the world, representing its citizens. And all of this, very important, in a way that serves the people's interest. So not serving the interests of outside parties or outside governments, serving the people's interests. And as you can see, there's an example, for example, the Assad regime or other countries as well, where they serve other states' interests at the cost of its own citizens. This would be a criminal act, and an act which would have an outcome, as you see in Syria. The people despise the president of the country, which is Bashar al-Assad, because he sold them out for other countries' interests or for his own personal interests over theirs. So this government must represent this country, represent its citizens, and serve the people's interests through these through this responsibility. That's 10 points. Now there are a number of side notes that I've written regarding the difference between peacetime and battle time. It's very important to understand battle time, you have a different atmosphere. You're in an emergency state. You can't really prosper and develop the way you can in a peaceful state, or a state that's in peace. It's like someone being sick or someone being healthy. I think it's similar, you could say, comparison. When you're sick, you're tired, you're drained, you can't really think very clearly. There's enemies trying to attack you, like germs, etc., and messing in a war zone. You've got your other enemies. So your body is always in fever. So that makes it hard for you to work and establish and think. So likewise with the government. When it's under pressure, it's in battle time, it's got poverty, it's got displaced people, refugees, etc. Bombs landing over the people's heads and in the marketplaces, on schools. This atmosphere makes it very difficult to govern. And so there's definitely a huge difference between peacetime and battle time. Number two, this is side notes, I mean. Now we're in side notes. Side note number two is there are many misconceptions and misunderstandings, as I mentioned, like the word Sharia, like the word jihad, Islam itself. Okay, what is Islamic government? Can it build ties with the outside world? Can it have peace treaties? No, of course it can. So these sort of things, these sort of little misconceptions, many people don't understand them or understand them in the wrong way, and these things sometimes become obstacles in the development of the government, being whether it's through its staff or people as public servants that work within this government, or the public, or from the outside world, pressure, misunderstandings, etc. This makes it difficult to travel forth. Maybe in future videos I'll be able to address some of these misconceptions, inshallah. Decision making. So third point, side note, the difficulty of making decisions in a war zone and in an emergency environment. So it's like choosing between a bad scenario and a worse scenario. That's just a constant atmosphere. And I've lived it here, even with myself and my family, my wife and my kids. So many times it's like I've got to choose between a bad decision and a worse decision. For example, I'll give you just an example. It's like here in Syria, in the liberated areas, we had the Syrian lira. This Syrian lira was falling apart. It was in free fall, caused havoc economically, even socially for the society. They wanted out. They wanted out of the Syrian lira to something different. Now the Turkish lira was an option. The Turkish lira had fallen as well, but it was more stable. It had negatives, many negatives. But it was like the lesser of two evils. That's the way I analyze this. That the Turkish lira at that time was the lesser of two evils. Even though it had many negatives, the negatives were less than the negatives that would be on the shoulders of the Syrian people if they kept the Syrian pound as the main currency. So transferring to the Turkish lira was a lesser of two evils, and that's what forced the society here to call for it, and then the authorities in Idlib to take it on and transfer to the Turkish lira. Now you see, like, you got to deal with the outcome of that, and you're constantly in that sort of environment. You got to deal with, do I do insihab, withdraw from areas, or do I stand firm and lose my soldiers and lose my vehicles? Do I retreat? People are going to speak about me. Do I not retreat? Do I take on, for example, a battle against the Assad regime? I've got to take it on myself, or do I wait and try to establish some time and establish my army to try to do it in the future? These sort of decisions that you can imagine the government and the authorities here have to go to face on a daily basis. And this is what many people may not necessarily understand, why and how things are travelling, because it's deciding between the lesser of two evils. They might see a decision, oh, what a terrible decision, but if they had seen the other options, they would understand that a lot of these decisions were actually the correct decision made. And that's the reality of living and establishing and governing and developing in a war zone. Also, quick analogy of governance, just so we can get it in perspective. It's like a father, the factions before coming into governance, like مثلا HTS or Ahrar al-Sham or others, before governance, like being a non-married man with no children. Coming into the governing side of things and authority is like transferring from a single man to a married man with kids. Now, for those who are viewers who are married, they may understand that. Imagine being no strings attached, single, easy to come and go, no real, you could say, responsibilities. Then all of a sudden, you've got a wife and kids and a house to look after and protect, food to provide for your house, defend them from enemies, clothe them, provide healthy water for them, food, etc. It's like that's a small version of governance. Multiply that by 1,000-fold the responsibilities on a government. It's like a father in the house. So he's got to make decisions, sometimes tough decisions. Sometimes his kids and wife won't necessarily understand what he's doing. And then he's got to clarify to them, address their affairs, care for them, nurture them. This is the father's role, just like this is the government's role, and particularly Islamic government. So their role is to nurture, to care, to serve, protect, defend, sometimes punish, sometimes a reward. This is a situation. I hope I was able to explain to you my perspective regarding 10 responsibilities of an Islamic government. This is the first video of a number of videos where I'll try, inshallah, to address these important affairs around Syria and Idlib and what's happening. It's your brother Ibrahim. Look forward to catching you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.